Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the World Class Television Review Podcast, a pro wrestling podcast with myself, Walker Stewart.
And James Southard.
And we are here to talk about what this podcast is going to be, and specifically what we're going to be talking about today is World Class Championship Wrestling. I don't know why I phrased it like that, because we're actually going to be talking about it every single episode, which is going to be crazy.
It is going to be a fun podcast. Of course, we're from right here in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma.
Yeah, the heart of world-class championship
about to say
wrestling.
3 hours north of Dallas. I think we were getting world-class TV before they even syndicated in the 80s. So it's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to talk about a lot of great history. We're going to go back and review every episode we could find of world-class championship wrestling. It's going to be a great time. I look forward to it. Walker, what a great company to pick to look at.
Well, man, all right, so let's go ahead and break the ice here with talking about why and kind of what our association is with world-class championship wrestling. Of course, we are both in the professional wrestling community, correct? Within the industry itself. I am a what would you phrase it? On-screen personality, commentator. I don't know.
You commentate. Sometimes you ring announce. You interview.
I've been around.
You're on the camera.
Yeah, my 1 year is actually coming up within a few weeks, which is kind of cool. Yeah, so that's kind of what we are. Or what I am doing here. I am, of course, the Velvet Voice, Walker Stewart, as some may know me around Oklahoma, Texas, Missouri, Kansas, the likes. Why'd you do that?
You're throwing stuff at
I'm
me.
throwing water bottles. Come on now.
Jesus, professionalism, man.
Hey, whatever. And then, of course, Diamond Jim James Southard to my right here.
Yes, I am mostly a ring announcer, but I've done just about everything there is to do. I've been ring crew, referee, ring announcer, commentator, you name it. I've just about done it. I'm coming up on 6 years hanging around wrestling here.
That blows my mind every time you say that, because we are pretty much the same age, which is
disgusting. I got in young, 14, 15 years old. Jeez. So, yeah,
Well, and you actually, speaking of how you got started in what is now become, via the blessings of Kevin Von Erich, world class.
Yes, I started with, at the time it was Imperial Wrestling Revolution, run by Jerry Bostic, based out of Ardmore, Oklahoma. And not too long after I moved on from being there, just because they were traveling all over Texas and I wasn't able to keep up with that schedule at the time.
Because you're 14, of course.
Yeah, I was 14. I was in, middle high school at this point, so, but they rebranded. They got the blessing. I had the pleasure of working with Ross and Marshall, Kevin's kids, phenomenal talents. Them versus the Aero Club, our good friend Coyote, and Kyle Hawk from out in Las Vegas. Probably one of the greatest feuds on the independent level, at least of that year, was Aero Club and Von Erichs going back and forth across Oklahoma and Texas. They received the blessing, of course, from Kevin to rename World Class Revolution, and they've been running under that name for 4 years now. And who knows, maybe we could review some of those shows in the future. But let's look at the matter at hand. We're going to be looking at World Class Championship Wrestling. Of course, they were based out of the Dallas-Fort Worth area. They ran spot shows at various times as far as Houston and San Antonio, all the way up to Lubbock and Amarillo. But let's talk a little first about the history of wrestling in Dallas, shall we?
Sure, yeah.
So the first major boxing and wrestling promoter in Dallas was a retired wrestler, Dick Griffin. He held his promoter's license there until he let it expire around 1940. At which point, Ed McLemore, who owned the Sportatorium, which of course would become the world-famous venue for world-class championship wrestling, as well as the Big D Jamboree and numerous other events, he got a promoting license as the Sportatorium Boxing Club, and ran boxing events and wrestling events as well, until 1966. Was the year that Jack Atkinson, the man known as Fritz Von Erich.
Oh, the Claw.
The Claw.
Yeah.
Fritz, how does Fritz go from being a Nazi German to having his kids the most beloved baby faces in Texas.
Well, in some parts of Texas that would still be the case. So, I mean, that transition from Nazi to babyface is pretty strong down south. So,
But anyways, back to the topic at hand. Fritz von Erich and Ed McLemore bought the rights to the Dallas booking office, moving it from Houston to Dallas, and they promoted under the Big Time Wrestling banner from 1966 until 1982, having numerous major cards.
and they were associated with the NWA at the time, correct?
Yes, they were the NWA territory there. They had their shows, of course, at the Sportatorium, with large shows being held at venues like Texas Stadium. But in 1982, they got the opportunity to syndicate their television nationwide, and with this, Fritz wanted to rebrand, come up with a new name besides Big Time Wrestling to freshen up the image, at which point the executive producer of the program, Mickey Grant, suggested the name World Class Championship Wrestling, which would become the name of the promotion and the syndicated series from 1982 until 1986, at which point they left the NWA, like you mentioned, around the same time that Bill Watts and Mid-South left the NWA to become the Universal Wrestling Federation. Everybody was trying to go national and compete with Vince McMahon and the WWF, and so they became known as the World Class Wrestling Association, still branding their television programs as World Class Championship Wrestling, but
Kind of like a governing body.
a governing body,
WCWA,
right?
yeah.
Like the IWGP and New Japan, or the GHC and NOAH. Perfect example there. And they did that until shit. Oh, there we go. Oh, until 1989, at which point they merged with the CWA, which was the Memphis territory, and they became known together as the USWA, the United States Wrestling Alliance. But that was a short-lived partnership.
Yeah, to say the least. USWA, right, was Lawler's promotion up in Memphis, correct?
Yes, they
Okay.
at this point they started splitting their time. They had a Memphis end and a Dallas end, and would have a tour bus taking some of the guys back and forth between the two towns. This went on for a little less than a year until they decided to pull out of the USWA and bring WCWA back and try to run world-class shows in Dallas, but this lasted 6 months before the company folded, and then they merged into two different companies. There's sort of two competing lineages, but
Yeah.
we'll get there perhaps at the end of this podcast as we get towards the end of World Class Championship Wrestling.
Yeah, so I mean that kind of sets the stage, and I kind of want to set the stage a little bit further, James, if you know what I'm saying.
Go right ahead.
I want to talk about where we're going to be starting in this lineage of sorts, and that is with the cock, James. I know that you and I incredibly familiar with the cock.
Oh, God, the cock.
Yes, the Peacock has, of course, some footage on there from World Class Championship Wrestling up in those days, and it starts actually not in any of the big time wrestling days for the most part. There are two shows that some sources consider to be big time wrestling. Those are going to be the first two that we talk about that happened in 1981, but they are labeled on the cock at least as WCCW Star Wars in 1981. The first one being in February, on February 22nd, 1981. The second one as Christmas Star Wars. And if you know anything about WCCW, which I am slowly learning, is that they were big fans of Christmas and they were big fans of Star Wars, it seems.
Christmas and 4th of July were always some of the biggest world-class cards held at Reunion Arena, of course, the home of the Dallas Mavericks until it was torn down and replaced by the American Airlines Center, a beautiful building that they would run their major cards at, and we're going to see quite a few Reunion Arena cards.
All right, well, to continue with the pace that we've set of setting the scene here, I want to talk a little bit with you about 1981 itself. Now, what I'd like to do is go back and pull the Observer archives or some sort of F4W online gimmick, but they didn't have those. I think you and I were talking a little bit before the pod, and you talked about Meltzer living in Wichita Falls at the time in 81, right?
A little later, 83 to 84, but definitely during the heat of the Von Erich Freebird feud. So
Gotcha. Okay, well, that makes sense. And so when it comes to that, though, we don't have any archives at our disposal for the week leading up to the first Star Wars event that we're going to be talking about. What we do have to set the scene, though, to talk about the people that we might see some of them involved. We most likely won't, according to James, who said, I don't think those guys ever touched the grounds of world class.
at least not in 81.
Yeah, we have, of course, the Wrestling Observer Newsletter Awards. And I was surprised at how little of them there are because you realize that over 20 years they said we need a category for everything.
It's amazing. You've got to fill pages, and you suddenly start coming up with new categories.
Well, let's start with the first category, which is one that might kind of relate to what we see here within World Class. Of course, World Class, at this point, operating under the National Wrestling Alliance. The biggest shock of the year, where Wildfire Tommy Rich beat Harley Race for the NWA Heavyweight Championship, the world's title, for like a week.
Yes, the greatest wrestler on God's green earth was defeated by Wildfire Tommy Rich. He got fired up and won the NWA World's Heavyweight Championship at the
Well,
he won the NWA World's Heavyweight Championship at the Omni in Atlanta and held it for a few days.
Yeah.
It wasn't a great run, but he can still say he held that NWA World's Heavyweight title, and quite possibly Tommy Rich might have been one of the hottest wrestlers of 1981.
Well, you know for a fact that dude was going around trying to get booked saying, I am a former NWA World's Champion, and they were putting that on posters, you know.
Oh, it always helps when you can say, the former champ's coming to town.
Okay, so the next category that we have in the Wrestling Observer Newsletter Awards is the best wrestling move in what is probably the biggest high spot in 1981, the Jimmy Snuka Superfly Splash.
Everybody loved the Superfly, brother. The Superfly was hitting splashes like crazy in 1981. It was about 2 years before we would see the infamous Superfly splash off the cage on Don Morocco in Madison Square Garden that everybody talks about. But at this point, he was just starting to pop on to the American wrestling scene, and people were loving the splash.
Can you think of anyone who worked in 81 with a move better than the Superfly Splash? Someone that you would put higher than Jimmy Snuka on this list if you could.
Off the top of my head, I don't think I can.
You know, was Ox Baker doing the hard punch back then? I don't.
Just for the fact that it started a riot in the 70s, the heart punch will forever be one of my favorite moves. How do you coincidentally have two guys die after a match? That is the greatest publicity you could ever get when you use the heart punch. Yeah, he died of a heart attack after our match. I hit him good.
And then, of course, we have for match of the year, two matches that I've probably never seen and probably never will. Pat Patterson versus Sergeant Slaughter in MSG, which apparently tied with Dusty Rhodes versus Ric Flair in Kansas City.
We got to watch. You've never seen the Sergeant Slaughter Pat Patterson street fight from MSG.
I feel like I've seen clips of it come across Reddit, but I don't think I've taken the time to sit through the entirety of that match now.
We're making you sit through that match.
Okay.
You're right. Sitting through that match.
Patreon content, baby. Patreon.com/whatever we call the Patreon.
Dusty Flair? Have you seen Dusty Flair?
I have, yes.
All right, there we go. All right, that's a little better.
I have seen that.
It's a little better.
And then, of course, Rookie of the Year, two job guys in WCW.
Oh.
Brad Armstrong and Brad Ringans.
Hey, Brad Armstrong was a phenomenal worker.
I got to be honest. I'm not familiar with Brad Armstrong in ring.
We're gonna start watching some early to mid '90s WCW and find me a more athletic guy than Brad Armstrong.
Okay. Well, what can you tell me about Brad Ringans?
What just a strong, massive, corn-fed Minnesota monster.
Brock Lesnar.
Exactly along those lines. Just a big beast of a man who will throw you across the room and barely break a sweat doing it.
Well, I know one person that you are going to go crazy for whenever I mention. Most charismatic, Michael Hayes. P.S., baby.
Purely sexy. You know it. Doot, doot, doot. Michael Hayes. Before he started wearing the pimp suits. How is it that Michael Hayes looks more just outrageous now than he ever did his entire Freebird run?
That's a great question.
I love me some Michael Hayes, and I love those suits, but my God, he looks like an Easter egg.
Well, after that, for Best on Interviews, we have a tie. I don't know why Meltzer's giving out so many ties this year. Lou Albano, the Cap himself, and Roddy Piper.
Captain Lou Albano! Gotta love the captain and Roddy Piper. This would have been Hot Rod in Georgia, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
On commentary with Gordon Soley. It was a phenomenal time to be seeing Hot Rod.
Yeah, for sure. Well, here's the thing. This completely guffawed me whenever I first saw this. Tag Team of the Year is a tag team that I had no idea ever happened. It was Terry Gordy and Jimmy Snuka.
What a wild combination. We talked about the Superfly Splash earlier, and to see him paired up with a young Terry Gordy. Terry would have been 18, 19, 20 around this time.
Yeah.
So a young Gordy, a young Bam Bam, and the Superfly. I'm sure that was a sight to see. I'm going to have to try to track some of those matches down.
And then, of course, our final four. Number one, Feud of the Year, Andre the Giant versus the Great O'Khan. Well, I think I read that wrong. Killer Khan.
Andre the Giant versus the stripper-loving Great O'Khan.
Brother, don't tell me that Andre the Giant versus the Great O'Khan would not be the most over thing on any wrestling card.
God.
I don't give a damn about Ric Flair's last match. If we have Great O'Khan strip it out.
Versus the reincarnation of Andre the Giant.
Brother, if we had Andre the Giant from when he was working in France, where he was doing kip-ups at 7'3",
massive flying drop kicks and just wild.
And Great O'Khan would bury him too. Great O'Khan would bury him too. That's the thing. It's the Japanese Godfather right there. He's crazy. I love it. And then Best Heel, Don Morocco.
Did we even talk about the fact that it's actually Killer Khan facing Andre?
No, yeah, I think I said it. If it wasn't apparent, it's Andre the Giant versus Killer Khan.
Just trying to keep you honest here,
Yeah,
Walker.
Okay, well, Best Heel, Don Morocco. I have seen a few Don Morocco matches in my day, nothing memorable. So
probably all WWF
Yes,
tie-dye
exactly,
run.
yeah.
Yeah, that explains it. You need to watch some Georgia with Don Morocco.
Well, it feels like I need to watch a lot of things
Rock
because
off
I'm
a Sunset Beach, Hawaii.
like, you're saying things I'm like, that doesn't sound too entertaining for me. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, this is the craziest shit in the world. I had no clue. So I don't know. Best babyface, Wildfire Tommy Rich, baby.
Somebody say something about fired up.
Here's the thing, man. I didn't realize Tommy Rich was as big as he was, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, and I very well maybe, but I feel like Tommy Rich was really big for like a really short period of time, and that's why I never consider him to be like, oh, this dude was crazy over, because it wasn't for that long of a period, was it?
Yeah, so really in the early 80s were, about late 1980 to 82, 83. He was really hot. I mean, that was, of course, 81 was the hottest year of his career. He had the build-up to and then the run with the NWA World Heavyweight title. Though short-lived, that was still a huge deal on Georgia television. So Tommy Rich was definitely a huge star in 1981 and definitely deserving of that Best Babyface award.
And then finally, number one award, Wrestler of the Year. They didn't have Female Wrestler of the Year and Male Wrestler of the Year. They just had overall Wrestler of the Year 1981. Who do you think it was?
Woo! It's the Nature Boy. Ric Flair, Slick Rick, was the Man of the Year in 1981. Of course, in September, he picked up his first NWA World's Heavyweight title from Harley Race. Of course, it was September of that year in which Rick won his first NWA World's Heavyweight Championship, winning it from Harley Race. So, without a doubt, the man with the most buzz coming out of 1981 had to be Ric Flair.
Yeah, man, 100%. And a lot of these guys, I mean, we didn't even go through every single award. We have Best Technical Wrestler in Ted DiBiase, who, again, you claim was a master in the ring that I never got to see because I only
you haven't
know him
watched
from the Fed
Mid-South, you haven't watched UWF, you haven't seen much of his Japan work.
And then, most improved being Adrian Adonis, which that doesn't really shock me whatsoever.
Adrian Adonis was so good. He was so good, whether it was with Jesse Ventura, whether it was with Dick Murdoch. I mean, the adorable Adrian stuff was, but you couldn't hide the talent that Adrian Adonis had.
Brother, tell me about Buzz Sawyer. What is one Buzz Sawyer fact that you know?
He was absolutely batshit crazy.
What? I don't know this story.
Buzz Sawyer was the man who took The Undertaker's money. He offered to train him. Taker paid Buzz Sawyer the money, and then Buzz went to Portland.
Yeah, there you go.
And he was gone.
Left his dog there, I think, too, right?
Yeah, there are more. I could probably spend an hour just talking about crazy Buzz Sawyer stories. Like, you want to talk about somebody who genuinely isn't quite right in the head? It was probably Buzz Sawyer.
The Buzz Sawyer Wrestling Podcast. This doesn't surprise me whatsoever. So those are the 1981 Wrestling Observer Newsletter Awards. Of course, we didn't have the how do you phrase it? The papers. What are they called, James? I'm losing it. What is the archives? We don't have the archives. I'm leaving that in. I don't give a damn.
It took you a while to get there. I hope you do.
I have to redo that. I feel bad.
The gimmicks.
We didn't have the gimmick for you, but sadly. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's the Wrestling Observer Newsletter Awards for 1981. We didn't have the gimmicks for you. We didn't have the archives, but I hope that does well enough in setting the scene. Did you know that Meltzer called Peter Maivia the most washed-up wrestler of 1981?
It was getting late into the High Chiefs run.
He's the High Chief, brother. That's Wrestler of the Year every single year. No, so of course now I want to talk about I want to set the scene a little further to February 22nd, 1981, Dallas, Texas, and what was known as the Reunion Arena, of course,
where with the Dallas Mavericks.
Oh yeah. WCCW Wrestling Star Wars 1981, not to be confused with WCCW Wrestling's Christmas Star Wars 1981, which happens a considerable amount of time away from February. There are only 2 shows on Peacock that are WCCW. The earliest tapes that we could find are 1981. We dealt with a tape collector, a tape trader, who traded tapes over Google Drive like a true professional, and like a true professional, he sent them to us, right, James? And then one of us, he who shall not be named, because it was probably me, forgot to download them off Google Drive, and we just assumed we'd have access to this drive forever.
Now it's gone.
It's gone.
It's gone, baby.
And so that is $50 down the drain, and we said, hey, really, the only, I think there were a few things from 1981 that were missing off of the Peacock app that we have, the cock, and of course they were on the drive, but we don't need to talk about those. Those don't matter. Okay,
we don't talk about the drive.
So we're gonna summarize those episodes real quick. The Von Erichs went over. So anyway, that is, of course, your summary for the missing 1981 pieces. We're going to talk about the card for February 22nd, 1981 in the Reunion Arena in Dallas, Texas, where we saw Killer Tim Brooks take on Mil Mascaras. We saw the Great Kabuki and Fritz Von Erich. We saw...
Oh, am I not going to get to put any of those motherfuckers over?
No, you aren't. We hate all of them. These are the worst workers in the world.
You're getting ready to put over Killer Tim Brooks and international superstar Mil Mascaras. And I'm like,
all right. Fine. What do you have to say about Killer Tim Brooks? Tell me.
Oh, this is it. No edit job. Nothing.
No. We're going, brother. You gotta keep up
We're
with the pace.
live, pal.
We're live. What do you have to say about Killer Tim Brooks?
Well, the first match on the card is Killer Tim Brooks, of course. Most noted today, you probably know him more as the trainer of Keith Lee and our good friend Jerome Daniel Griffey. But here at Star Wars, he was taking on international star Mil Mascaras.
You know what story I have about Killer Tim Brooks? I'm not going to have a lot of stories about a lot of these people. But he's going to be happy that I shouted him out on the pod. I have a friend and brother out in California, out in the Fresno scene in California, Toxic Trent. He's the man, the Toxic Trent himself, was trained, he probably does not want me to admit this, but I don't care, by Killer Tim Brooks on a different podcast I do, the Blade Job Wrestling podcast with Ethan Carnes. You can go listen to Trent tell this story, probably better than I will, but apparently Killer Tim Brooks showed up to train Toxic Trent with a bullet wound. He was training down in Texas, showed up with a bullet wound. The theory is it was a drug deal gone wrong, and he is bleeding out. He's like, I'm holding it in, brother. It's fine. We're gonna, all right.
Just stuff full of
Yeah,
toilet paper,
yeah, pretty much
paper towels, and just holding it in.
Self-bandaged, no hospital. Killer Tim Brooks putting the killer into his name, or the killed. I don't know. That was
and the first
crazy.
time you told me the story, it was Manny Fernandez.
Well, Manny Fernandez, I heard the same story.
So there's multiple wrestling trainers being shot and drug deals gone wrong in Texas.
Two separate people told me those two separate stories. I don't know if there's a big rib I'm not being let in on or what.
This has to be a rib on you. I refuse to believe that Killer Tim Brooks and Manny Fernandez both showed up to training sessions with gunshot wounds.
Who do you think are the two? Who do you think's more likely out of the two, Tim Brooks or Manny Fernandez?
I don't know either of them good enough personally to comment.
Personally, yeah. Professionally, it's Tim Brooks. I mean, I don't know.
I mean, the man was nicknamed Killer. I mean, you know.
Well, we're gonna see him take on Mil Mascaras, which the only thing I really know about him for fact is that he's Alberto Del Rio's uncle.
That's your only connection to Mascaras, isn't it?
Well, because that's the only thing they said when Del Rio came in 2011. He's wrestling royalty, Maggle.
And you can't look back, brother.
Yeah, I can't. And then of course we have the Booker. Not Booker T. It's Fritz Von Erich. We got Ed McLemore taking on the Great Kabuki.
I think Gary Hart still had the book at this point, but either way, Big Fritz taking on the Great Kabuki. That will be a great match. Gotta love the claw. Seeing Fritz Von Erich sort of on his farewell ride, if you will, it's going to be a good one to see. But then our next match, we've got an NWA World Tag Team match with Fritz's sons, the Von Erichs, David and Kevin being the tag team here, taking on Ali Mustafa and Hercules Ayala. Hercules Ayala, I know him a little bit. I've seen some of his work in Puerto Rico with Carlos Colon and WCCW. Ali Mustafa, I have not seen, so this will be interesting for me as well.
And they're the champions, James. It's crazy.
The champions, the NWA World Tag Team Champions, facing the challengers, the Von Erichs.
Well, and then the match after this, I have to wonder, and I've never seen this guy in my entire life, but this just sounds like a Southern racially charged gimmick against Asian people. Chang Chung takes on Bruiser Brody.
Chang Chung, of course, I haven't seen Chang Chung work, but I've seen various gimmicks of Chang Chung. I've seen Kendo Nagasaki, which, of course, that's how most people would know. And he was known as Mr. Sakurada in Stampede, where Bret Hart credits him with a large part of his training.
Really?
Yes,
okay,
indeed. So there you go. Chang Chung, a little bit of history.
And then, of course, we have an 8-man battle royal with every single worker on the card in it.
Everybody's working twice tonight, boys.
It's just an Oklahoma indie show, brother. I don't know what we're doing here.
Oh, big.
2022 Oklahoma indies. I don't want to pay 2 more workers to come in and work the card.
Hot dogs and handshake battle royal, ladies and gentlemen.
We're going to get all the boys out here one more time. You're all working the main. It's a battle royal for the shot at the title. That's the best damn booking I have ever heard in my life, James Southard.
Is the show outside too?
Oh my God, you bet your ass it is. That's why we couldn't pay more people to come in and work the card. Anyway, that's the 8-man battle royal. And then, finally, the NWA World's Heavyweight Championship match. The champion, Harley Race, fresh off of, would he be fresh off of? No, he would be right before he loses to Wildfire Tommy Rich for a week only to get it back.
Indeed, he'd lose that the summer of '81. He'd get it back and hold on to it till the fall when Ric Flair would take it and carry it through the end of the year.
But here he takes on none other than Kerry Von Erich. And that is
the modern-day warrior, the prodigal son of the Von Erich clan, taking on the NWA World's Heavyweight Champion.
You're going to hate me when I say this. I've only seen Kerry matches as the Texas Tornado. And that's why we're even doing the podcast, is because I, of course, had my opportunity to work with the now World Class Revolution, the spiritual successor to World Class Championship Wrestling. It got me and James talking. I worked the show back in May, and you were there, of course, as well, in attendance. And we were just like, I don't know enough history about this company. And so we decided we were going to sit down. We were going to watch every single episode of World Class Championship Wrestling that we could find. We were going to review it, and I don't know if you can tell, James, but I'm definitely a bit of the more new school variety. You know, NWA rules don't exactly apply to me.
Definitely. Considering your only references are Texas Tornado and the Goon,
the $1 Million Man,
$1 Million Man, yeah.
But I mean, and Chang Chung still sounds like the most racially charged gimmick. That's, you know, like, you got to look at this product from a 1980s perspective, not from the lens of 2022. I feel like, are we about to go through a bunch of stuff where I watch this and I'm like, that would get you canceled today?
You're probably going to be looking at me during a lot of this. You're going to be like, I need explanation, or why, or... But, you know, hey, it's going to be fun. You're seeing some new stuff for the first time. I'm seeing some old favorites, so.
Well, there we go. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the introduction, the first episode, of course, of the World Class Television Review. This, of course, is a pro wrestling podcast. Thanks to Gold Standard Media for this one. Make sure you check them out. And, of course, don't forget to check out more episodes, where our next episode, we're going to check out this lovely card that we just read out to you. And ladies and gentlemen, that is all we have time for here today. Thank you for checking out the World Class Television Review, a pro wrestling podcast, episode 1. For Walker Stewart.
For James Southard.
This has been World Class Television Review's own pro wrestling podcast.
Take me back to Texas when I die.